Yeah, I think Iris, would you like us to just introduce ourselves for your benefit? Our benefit? Yes, let's do that. Let's do that. So I'm Karen and I'm the chair of the Ethics Committee, and I'm going to pass it on to Gail.
Hi, I'm Gail Pringle, board member of the Ethics Committee. Hi, Iris. We do know each other from many moons ago.
Yeah, and Lynn?
Hello, I'm Lynn Richards and I'm a member of the Ethics Committee.
Linda?
Hello.
And a member of the Ethics Committee. Lois? A member of the Ethics Committee. Okay. And Stephen?
Hello, everyone. I'm Stephen, another member of the Ethics Committee.
Thank you. Rob?
I think everybody knows me, and Iris knew me when I had dark hair.
Oh, really? How long ago was that? Was it just last month, Rob?
It's got, yeah. If only. About 20 years, I think, in the Iris.
Well, I think I've known Iris for maybe longer than that. So yeah. Let's go to Angela.
Oh yeah, hi, Angela Perry. I work for the Police and Crime Commissioner.
Okay, Teresa.
Hello, I'm Teresa Wilcox. I work for the Police and Crime Commissioner.
Danielle.
Hi, I'm Danielle Nuttall and I work for Better Times, which does some of the PR and communications for the Police and Crime Commissioner. I'm losing my voice, apologies.
Thank you. Mark?
Hello, I'm Mark Peel. I'm one of the members of the committee.
Thank you. And Rich?
Hi, yeah, Rich Ward, Detective Superintendent, Head of Professional Standards Department at the Counter-Corruption Unit for Leicestershire Police.
Thank you. And Iris, would you like to introduce yourself? I think Iris may be having problems because she's come back and out and in a couple of times. So I'll move on and hopefully it will get sorted before we get to stop and search. Okay. So are there any apologies for this meeting, Angela or Teresa?
No apologies received, Chair. Thank you.
No apologies. Okay. Linda has indicated that she might need to leave about 3:30, so that's fine, Linda. Is there any other matters of urgent business that we need to take?
No notifications, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Any declarations of interest?
No.
No, nor from me. Thank you. So just to remind everybody that this meeting is being recorded, and if you need to speak, please raise your hand. Otherwise, please stay on mute because it does actually affect some of what I can hear. So please stay on mute. And we shall move to the minutes of the meeting, which were on the 18th of September. So I'm going to go through them just for correctness and ask for any corrections from any member of the committee or from the police staff. So on page 1. Oh, Lynn?
Yes, at 19:20, it's the minutes of the meeting held on the 19th of June.
Yeah,
2020.
Yeah.
Thank you. So we just need to correct that date. Any other corrections on page 2? Oh, like a duck. Okay. Page 3. Page 4.
Oh, sorry, Chair. On page 3,
yeah.
I think it talks about looking at reserve mentoring. I think it should be reverse mentoring.
Okay, yes, it should be reverse mentoring. Yes, thank you, Rob. Page 4. Five. Yeah. Okay, that's great. Just to pick up from page 1, that it was unanimously agreed that Dr. Peel would be the deputy chair of the committee. He wasn't at the last meeting, and I have since spoken with Mark, and he's happy to take that role on. So I'm very pleased that Mark is now our deputy chair of this committee. Thank you. Shall we move to, are there any other matters arising that are not on the rolling action sheet? Perhaps we'll pick up the rolling action sheet first, and then if there's anything else that's outstanding, we can pick that up. Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Okay, Angela, would you like to take us through the rolling action sheet, please?
Yes, will do, Chair. Item 6, which is the first one on the sheet. I have to admit I have not had a conversation with Unison yet about their objections to members looking at grievance files, but I will do that before the next meeting.
Okay.
Action 8, that is discharged. That is now happening as of today, obviously. Action 11 will be for to do when we get that item on the agenda for the next meeting. Annual report. In fact, I don't think that date's in the diary for you to meet with the chief or the chair yet, is it? I'm not aware, unless someone can tell me different.
I think one has just come through, Angela.
Ah,
so
okay.
Set up for the 15th of January.
Okay, so that action is complete then.
Yeah.
Action 19, and I must admit I couldn't quite remember what that was referring to, and I need to go back to the paper on that. I looked at it briefly earlier and haven't had time to check the paper, so we'll leave that on there.
Okay.
Action 20 was inequality, not equality. It was an equality impact assessment, and whether one had been carried out. Now, Rob, I don't know whether you can add anything to that one or not. I know Julia you were going to speak to Julia.
Yeah. Do you want to transfer the actions over to me? I have mentioned it, but put them to me, and during the meeting I'll email across and I'll discharge them.
Okay, 22 likewise then, I think.
Yeah.
24, well, I think that's complete. It's on the agenda again for today.
Yeah.
And likewise, actions 25, 26 are complete. 27, that will be for a future meeting. And just bear with me. 28 is complete. And can I ask members if they received the diversity and inclusion strategy? Yes, you did. So that's also complete. And that's all the actions, Chair.
Thank you.
Can I just make a comment on the diversity and inclusion strategy?
Yes.
It's iterative. So that version there, we're looking to enhance it and develop it even further for some developments that we've brought in since then. So I think if the panel members and yourself are happy, I'll bring something back probably in 6 months' time, because there's quite a lot happening in that space.
Okay.
Thank you. That would be great. Thank you very much, Rob. Okay. So Iris has just messaged to say she's having problems with her internet. She's about to log off. So I don't think she's joined us, but I think we're going to have to press ahead because I don't know if she will rejoin us.
Yeah. Press ahead.
So if everybody's happy, is there any other matters arising that anybody wanted to raise from the minutes? Okay, that's great. I'm going to move on to the Stop and Search annual report. Do we have anybody that's going to take us through this, Rob, or are we just going to comment?
I was hoping that, because we've had quite a conversation around this before, haven't we? And I was hoping that Iris was going to give her view, because obviously she independently chairs that coercive powers, and the intention was just to sort of demonstrate how transparent we are in that sort of arena, and get her context. So it's really disappointing that we've lost her, but I know if she tries to dial back in, I don't know if you want to go straight to her then. I mean, I was going to take it that it's as read. There's a few developments that aren't in the paper that I could probably brief you on, which I think you might find quite interesting. But if you wanted to do the paper, and then I'll talk through some discussions we're having with DMU around doing some work around AI, and getting really into some of the detail and giving a slightly different view of it.
So, Rob, are you suggesting that you do that now, or when we finished giving you some comments?
But do you want me to? I'm good either way, whichever's best for you, Chair.
I think what I'll do, if you don't mind, I'll take our comments first, because I think what you've got to say, just from the sounds of it, might answer some of our questions.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
so let me take our points first. There was quite a lot of comment and discussion on this paper, Rob. So as you might expect, because it is so complex. It's not just a question of stops, it's what it leads to and what happens afterwards and how it comes about, and body worn video and all sorts of other issues. Absolutely. So it's quite complex. So I'm going to open up to the committee first before I wade in with comments, and just ask for any indications by hand, please. If I can't see you, it's going to have to be by your electronic hand. Okay, I'm going to go to Stephen then, because I think, oh, Mark, you did indicate just before Stephen, so let's just take you and then I'll go to Stephen.
Okay, I'll be as brief as I possibly can be, Chair. Thank you. I've said this before about a number of police reports, not just this one, but I'll keep saying it because I think it's worth saying. The presentation of data is very variable across this report. Some of it is really useful. Some of it is very difficult to read, and in consequence, it's not especially useful. And there's very little comparative data with respect to your statistical comparators, your statistical neighbours. So, for example, there's a bar chart across all forces on page 8, which is comparative data, but it's very difficult to see what those differences are other than reading small scale differences in size on A4. Towards the end of the report, there are some very useful tables with real data, but in the centre of the report, there are some incredibly complex graphs. I'll take you particularly to the graph on page 13, which I'm sure is really useful, and I'm really used to looking at data, but it's very, very difficult, certainly at the scale of an A4 page, perhaps rather than a PowerPoint presentation on a big screen, to actually make sense of it. Now, I know that what you've done here is to try to make the report visually interesting, and that's welcome in many ways, and I understand the difficulties of writing this sort of thing. What actually I think is you've got here is a report that's in some sense is neither one thing nor the other. You've got hard data at the back and some fairly sensible small scale graphs, but you've got other graphs and bar charts that are almost meaningless in this context. And while I'm on my soapbox, it's lovely to see pictures of officers standing by their cars. It's wonderful. I don't really think it's got a place here. It dresses up the report as perhaps something that it shouldn't be. I know it's giving a human face to the people who are actually doing this work, but I would suggest to you this is either a data-driven, strong on comparative performance report, or it's a report that's for public consumption and presents a sort of human face of policing. We've got a bit of fish and fowl, I think, in this report. But that's all I'll say at this point.
Well, that started us off, hasn't it?
It's something else, right?
You sit on the fence, Mark.
I won't say a word.
It's good. No, it's really useful feedback, genuinely.
You are muted, Karen.
Rob, sorry, I'm just going to take a few other comments before I bring you back in. Okay, so Stephen, did you want to come in at that point? Then I'm going to bring Lynn and Gail.
Let Gail have their hands up. Let them go first, and I'll come back.
All right, Gail.
Hi, thanks. I think I did come in after you, Stephen, but I'll make the couple of points that I wanted to make. I think, firstly, I mean, generally in the report, what I've picked up is that actually 65% of your stop and searches didn't lead to what you would refer to as a positive outcome. So in 65% of the cases where you've actually stopped somebody, they haven't had what you thought that they had. So I'm not quite sure really how effective then that is. One of the main comments that I had was it would be quite interesting and useful for us, I think, as a committee. I mean, Mark's made some reference to the data, but what I really wanted to see, which I didn't see, was maybe an age profile as well, because I just suspect that that would actually give us quite a lot of information about the kinds of people that are being stopped and searched. So, you know, there's obviously data in terms of ethnicity, but I'd quite like to see an age profile and breakdown as well.
Thank you. Lynn?
Yes, I've got a couple of questions and a comment. When we've been dip sampling, we as a committee have been concerned when officers have been wearing body-worn video but haven't turned it on while searching a vehicle, for example. Is there extra scrutiny on these occasions? We can see that dip sampling happens of the actual footage, but I'm wondering if there's extra scrutiny when the footage is not there to be seen. The second point is at the top of page 8, it talks about complaints and there being only 4 complaints. And in the past, we've also commented that we see this as a cause for concern rather than a measure of success, because you would expect the complaints to rise and fall with the numbers of stop and search, it being an unpopular power, shall we say. And so that led me to think about what definition you're using for the stop and search complaint. And I wondered whether it was a specific complaint about the use of the power stop and search, or is it any complaint that arises out of a stop and search? Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. Stephen?
There's a lot there. I don't know if so far if Rob wants to respond and wait, or if you want me to go now, Rob.
I think keep going, and then if you're happy, what I'll do is I'll pick off a few of the ones which are really quite easy to answer, and then probably some of the presentational stuff. It does link to some of the conversations with DMU and where we're heading, I think. So hopefully you'll see that I think we're actually on a similar page with that.
Okay.
Go ahead, Stephen.
I'll continue then. I think my starting point has to be the academic literature on stop and search, which suggests the academic literature on stop and search is pretty clear that it suggests it's not particularly effective. And it largely questions why and how it's used. And obviously that was one of the big drivers behind the best use of stop and search scheme. And in many respects, how that was really effective in the way that it reduced the numbers of stops and searches, particularly section 60 as well. And actually, it is good to note that as a force you aren't using section 60 because that is a particularly problematic power. So we'll start with good. And then we'll move on to the not so good. And there's a number of things that I've highlighted in here. The first, I think, I reiterate what Mark said about format, but in particular, the interest in detail and data seems to be buried towards the back. The start seems to be very much a sort of, look at what we do and almost how well we're doing. And then, so for instance, you have to, under the best use of stop and search scheme, record positive outcomes and what they are. And for most of it, I'm thinking, but yes, you have to record them. You say there are positive outcomes, but what are they? They have a range of positive outcomes, and what are those figures? And it's right at the end that I get those. I want to see those much earlier, because that's what I was interested in. So again, like Mark, I think how this data is presented could be done in a better way. So if you look at the national figures, for instance, the national figures will give you a sort of executive summary up front at the beginning. These are the big messages from the data, and then the detail comes afterwards. I think that would be useful. The other points, it's not made a lot out of, but the disproportionality for Leicester, particularly around Misuse of Drugs Act searches, 13.19 more likely to be stopped and searched if you were black compared to being a white suspect. That for me is an alarming figure. That's above the national average in context where there's a low BAME population in Leicestershire compared to Leicester. And I'm surprised that figure isn't made more of in the data as this is a cause for concern, what's happening here. I'm very much aware that the disproportionality is not necessarily evidence of discrimination. You know, there could be explanation for that, but when it comes as big as that, that should be raising alarm bells. The second, and we've talked about this before, and I think the best way of approaching this is not to have a discussion about it, but to actually ask for more information. You know, the claim is made on my notes, again, on page 14, about the level of knife crime in the black community in Leicester. I've asked before about that. You know, what are those offences? Are these offences of assault with a knife? Are these offences of possession of the bladed article? You know, what's the basis for that claim? That claim is a really important one. And I think the reason why that claim is really important is if it's false, if the data that you've got doesn't back up your claims, and you're using that as a justification for why you are engaging in stop and search operations in particular communities, you are running the risk of what Ben Bradford would describe as statistical discrimination. So you're working on a basis of statistic that isn't true, you're operating on the effect of that, and the indirect effect of that is one of differential and therefore discriminatory treatment. So I would like at some point for that figure of, I think the phrase is, you know, over 5 times more likely to be engaged in knife crime, I'd like that to be backed up and put to us. I'm not going to put you on the spot now, because I think that's unfair, but I'd like the working out, if you would like, on that. And I think the next point is similar. So it is on page 21 that we get the breakdown on outcomes. Now, I took that data and actually did a little bit more analysis of what you've given us there. And in particular, I looked at the data of stop and searches under the Misuse of Drugs Act and success. And the reason I did that is we know from knowing the rate of offending in different communities is always difficult. But one thing we do know about in drug offences is particularly difficult, because discovering offences is as a result of proactive police operations. So police statistics are very much a product of what you do. We do have pretty robust data on self-report studies on drug use, and what they do tell us is that the white community engages in drug use just as much, if not more, than the black community. There is no differentiation in offending behaviour there, and we know that from self-report studies. So in terms of what's happening to black suspects, is not necessarily, we can't explain any differentials on the basis of offending behaviour, because there is no big major difference there. So if we look at the statistics on stop and searches under Section 23 of the Misuse of Drugs Act, if you're a black suspect, you will be arrested after a stop and search 17.9% after stop and searches. If you're white, that figure reduces to 13.1%. The comparison there is in relation to local resolution. If you're black, local resolution as a success will occur 14.9% of cases, whereas if you're white, it's 21.1%. On the face of it, without any further information, the alarm bells have gone off in my head is that what's happening here is that if you're stopped and searched by the police and you're black and drugs are found, you are more likely to be arrested than having a local resolution. Whereas if you're white and drugs are found, you are more likely to receive a local resolution rather than arrest. So i.e. the more coercive powers are being used disproportionately on black suspects when compared to white suspects. Now, of course, I mentioned a moment ago that those bare differentials are not necessarily evidence of discrimination. It could be something else. What I want to ask you as a force of, have you taken those numbers? Because the report quite rightly identifies a differential in outcomes for black suspects around arrests. It quite rightly recognises that and flags it up, which is good. Given this is data you've got, in terms of, you could analyse this. You could say, is there something different going on? So are our black suspects, for instance, more engaged in supply? Are they engaged in more higher class A drugs rather than cannabis? Are they engaged with higher figures? Do they have more paraphernalia that suggests things? All of these things could explain it. I think from a legitimacy point of view, that's work that you need to do as a force. You need to take, even if it's just 1 year, take those figures and go, what's going on? Can we defend what's happening here? Because I think you need to do that. It's not enough to identify in the report there's a problem. I think you need to go that little step further. And That could be working with another agency, or that could be working with your own analysts to do that work.
Yeah.
Thank you, Stephen. So Rob, yeah, I think there's a lot there to discuss. I mean, and for me too, I had very, very similar questions to my colleagues, particularly concerned at the lack of discussion or analysis and what could be the possible causes, especially when it comes to things like knife crime and drugs, and the kind of tautology that sometimes happens where the stereotyping can lead to more stops, and that in turn leads to more arrests, and then it leads to more stereotyping. So I just want a little bit more. So I'll let you speak though, and then we can take it forward.
Karen, and anticipating, I mean, bearing in mind we've had discussions on stop search in the past, haven't we? So I get a sense of exactly where you are, and I'm hoping that you recognise the fact that it is extremely complex, and getting into that level of understanding is definitely where we've headed. If I share with you very openly the conversations we're having with the DMU is, and I accept all of the really constructive feedback that's been presented. This is complex, and getting to underneath the data and not jumping to conclusions in either direction is really important. So what we've said to the DMU is we will give them access to absolutely every piece of data that we have in terms of stop search. We're particularly interested in them exploring a number of areas, but one in particular would be around the factors of disproportionality, and disproportionality based on the geographics of where the activity is taking place. So we're not only just going to give them access to our stop search, we'll also, if we need to, give them access to all our crime information as well, so they can do whatever they need to do with that. But certainly in terms of their immediate sort of observations is just about how some of the data is perhaps presented. So Mark, I think you raised the issue around the presentation of the data and therefore the interpretation of it. And one of the things that they think that there is a layer missing here is we've started to capture what triggered the action. So for example, you know that late 40s is called from a member of the public. So if I share with you last night, my phone went twice in the evening. Both involved firearms and machetes. They are members of the public that are calling in about an incident that's happening live on a location. It involved a vehicle and it involved multiple people. Naturally, the police have gone to that location. They've done a containment, and a number of people have been stopped. A number of people have been searched. Machetes have been recovered and people have been arrested. One thing that they think that we are failing to do, and they were quite brutal in their approach, which I really welcome, was you need to put the context around the understanding. So when you talk about a 65% where it's not led to a result, if there's intelligence that the car is moving drugs, for example, and we stop a car with 4 people in it, depending on what circumstances, sometimes that may result in all of the people being arrested. But in the case of a weapon, for example, sometimes it's just one person being arrested and others aren't. So what they're saying is there's a number of things that they want to understand more. So it's not just around the numbers of stop searches against individuals, which is really important because that's the impact it has on that person, but also being able to place it in the context of what led to that, and actually how many people were involved and searched as part of one incident. Because you might have multiple searches in one incident, and one incident might be as a response of a call to a member of the public. So it's just trying to understand the totality of how did it start, what was involved. That's one incident. What did that then lead to in terms of searches, and what did it then lead to in terms of outcomes? So that was a really welcome first observation from them. So that's starting fairly quickly. We're in discussions with them now. Paul Allen is leading on our behalf, and we've sort of said, look, we're going to be as open, as transparent as you like, and we're really up for feedback about how you think presentationally we need to be constructing the data going forward. So Mark, your comments, and again, Stephen, you put some comments in around data presentation. I would really welcome from the panel if you looked at it from what would be the ideal way that we need to address this data. We can feed that into that project, because whatever they get back from it is a really good starting point for them going forward to the next phase. So again, I'm generally really open to, yes, it's not perfect. I'm hoping you see that we're trying to be as transparent as we can. But if you've got thoughts and ideas, please let me have them from the panel, and I can feed them into that project. Karen, I think you're on mute still.
Sorry. Did you have any response to Lynn's question about whether there's any extra scrutiny when body-worn video is not worn?
Yeah, I mean the body-worn video. I know we've got Rich on from PSD. My expectation with body-worn video is if you're going into any sort of policing incident or activity where you're having some form of interaction, the advice is turn your body-worn video on. Now, practically, sometimes you do come across things, you get out very quickly. I mean, I went out on patrol a couple of weeks ago, and you do find yourself dealing with things, and you're in the moment. So it's not something that I think we're always going to get 100% right. But I think actually from a scrutiny perspective, where body-worn video isn't turned on, we naturally are going to go and look a little bit more. But Rich, I mean, from a PSD perspective, is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, just to echo that we've seen some incidents where body-worn video hasn't been used, but we've been fortunate to have either city CCTV or private CCTV, which has actually allowed us to view the incident from a distance. And it's that in the moment, because a lot of what officers are doing, it's spontaneous. And the one that sort of comes to mind was a stop check that's happened immediately. It's in front of them. They've had to react to it. And they've not had time to put the body-worn video on. So there are occasions where it just simply isn't practical. And obviously, depending on what the situation is, depending on what's going on with the officer in terms of the kind of situation, sometimes it's just a natural thing that if they may have to sort of protect themselves. There may be a sort of a protection matter for members of the public as well. So it's just not naturally, sometimes it doesn't happen. So my expectation, certainly from an area point of view, is if there isn't any body-worn video, then there's greater scrutiny should be put in around that by the sergeant. And certainly from our perspective, if we get a complaint off the back of it, we will go looking for all the other evidence to really give us a very good understanding of what's happened and why. That's kind of where we would look at it. But the direction is any stop, search, vehicle or person, the body-worn video should be used. That's the direction. And certainly from our point of view, I would like to see body-worn video used a lot more. It's really helpful. It's transparent. I think it gives the officers some support. I think it also gives the public confidence as well. So for me, the more use of the body-worn video, the better, because it can give you a really good eye on exactly what's happened.
Okay.
Karen, can I just add to that, just to give you some reassurance? I think what I'm going to do is, because I know that's gone out as a directive, okay, and we are picking it up through the PSD. I'm going to take something to have a look at tracking the trend lines of where we've got stops that have got body-worn video and haven't, so that we can see the true impact of that and the trend going up. The other thing that you've heard me speak about previously is the volume of churn with our frontline staff. Yeah. So at the moment, we know that we are, bringing in a significant amount of new officers, and one of the things I'm going to track is how are they getting taught to do stop searches, because it's a bit like the muscle memory, isn't it? If you're taught from day one, it becomes standard behaviour. So two things I'll take away there and have a bit of a look at on the back of that conversation.
Okay, thanks. I've got Gail and Mark waiting. I'll bring you in just a minute, both of you, but I just wanted to, because what you asked for, Rob, was any input into helping you with the conversations with DMU. And absolutely. I think what I've heard from committee members is we need more comparative data. We need it to be presented in a way that's broken down so that we can actually, so it's meaningful. And it might be that we have to have smaller reports on one part of stop and search at a time. Gail was also asking about a breakdown by age profile. Yeah. And Lynn was asking about complaints as well, and body-worn video. And so those are the kind of main areas. And the bigger one is around addressing the issue of disproportionality, and making sure that you're not feeding into the stereotypical views of the fact that Black people use more drugs and have more knives or do more knife crime. So we really need to be very careful about those particular areas, and those are the main areas that I think the committee have raised this afternoon. Let me just bring Gail and Mark in, and then I'm going to conclude this discussion, because I think there's plenty to be getting on with there. Gail.
Thanks, Karen. It was just about going back to the body worn video. I was involved in the dip sampling recently, and I wasn't aware before doing that actually the footage is only kept for a certain amount of time. Can you just give us some, what's your perspective in terms of the availability of that footage if it's needed for a complaint? Because I think one of the cases that I was looking at, that the video wasn't available, and I didn't realise it. It gets stored and filed somewhere. I wasn't quite sure for how long. I think the officer there was saying that there is some tech thing you can do to retrieve it if it's really important. I just wanted to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, I guess there's probably two layers to it, Gail, because obviously there's a lot of body worn video that gets captured during a shift. My sense would be where there is a legitimate public trust issue, I would probably be keen to extend that longer. So I'm going to take it away. I mean, MOPI, Management of Police Information, is the driver, and generally we'll retain information up to sort of 6 years, and then we've got a weeding policy that gets rid of it. But obviously you can imagine the amount of footage 2,000 officers are taking in every single day. It would be a colossal amount of data, and you've then got to store that data, and we're then into paying for, at the moment we're looking at cold storage options in the cloud and all sorts of things, but it is we're
6 years sounds more than reasonable. I mean, I think that's quite standard, but I think
I don't think we're keeping it for 6 years, Gail, and that's me being honest. I think what they're doing is they're looking at it, and if it doesn't lead to anything evidential, there's a separate weeding policy, because actually they're recording stuff all the time. I think my recollection is that they retain it for about 12 months, but I'm going to go away and have a look. But actually, in terms of stop search, we could quite easily bring that into line with other MOPI requirements. But it's all about data volume, nothing more than that.
Okay, thank you. Mark. Come off mute, Mark.
Don't you just love the technology? I'm sorry for that. I'll be as brief as I can. Over the course of the time the committee's been around, we've seen quite a bit of body-worn video footage, and a couple of things to say. Firstly, it's improved massively, I think, over the recent couple of years in terms of its quality, both of the pictures and of the sound, and it usually reflects extremely well on your office. So I really pick up the point about it being not just for issues to do with the judicial system directly, but it also being to do with the safety in every sense of that word of your officers. We've really seen an improvement over 3 years or so. I really take your point about being in the moment, getting out in a circumstance that perhaps is quite instant. But in terms of whether it's a direction, a recommendation, or an expectation that officers switch on their body-worn videos, you actually used all three of those words in terms of what
it would be it would be an expectation, Mark, but I'm a realist. Things happen really quickly, but my expectation is you start from a position of, if you're going to go in and do some proactive interaction with a member of the public, which is you're using your powers, the expectation is capture it on your body-worn video, because it protects them, it captures the evidence in real time, and it affords, scrutiny later on. So that would be my expectation, definitely.
I think it should be a senior officer direction more than an expectation. I take your point completely, but if it's a cultural change you're looking for here, it needs to have a very clear message attached to it. That's a discussion perhaps for another time. Yeah. And just picking up on Lynn's point, if you had a stop and search, you're talking about circumstances, to use your words, that are a legitimate public trust issue. I think I'd be really concerned in circumstances where every officer involved in it forgot to put on their body-worn video, more than circumstances where perhaps one or two of them forgot to put on their body-worn cameras. Because I take your point, and the same would follow through for me. I perhaps would forget to put it on in the haste of the moment. I think if several officers are involved and all of them forgot to put it on, that would ring some alarm bells. And I'm glad to hear that you're following it up with CCTV. Thanks for that.
Absolutely. No, I agree.
Okay, thank you, Mark. So Rob, I think you've got plenty of points there from the committee, but I'll volunteer myself if you need any more and you want to sort of talk it through a bit more, then I'm happy to do that. And maybe other people from the committee would be happy to do that as well, because I think it's such an important thing to try and get right.
No,
especially
thank
if
you,
you're in
Karen.
discussion with DMU.
Yeah,
Okay,
thanks.
thank you very much. Thank you. Rich, are you okay? Did you want to add something? I saw your hand go up at one point.
Yeah, it's just to say that if body-worn video is deleted off the system, we can retrieve it, and we do retrieve it in PSD. So it's just to give you that reassurance. If it's not marked as evidential, we then get a complaint. I'm just seeing one now pop up from 8 months ago. We will retrieve it.
Oh, right.
Brilliant.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's amazing what our PSD can do.
I know, amazing. All right, so we will move on then and to paper B, which is about special operations. And members of the committee did have some comments, as you might expect, Rob, on this. I'm going to open up and see if anybody would like to raise their hand or speak. Or Lynn, can I go to you first, because I think you had some important points in the initial discussion.
Yes, I was looking at your questions, particularly at 31, where you were, is it 31?
Yeah, I think.
Yeah.
Sorry, my sound went then. Sorry, 32. What additional measures, ethical considerations we should look at? And one of the things I was thinking about was the importance of the data that you're holding, the value of it as it grows, but whether that conflicts with the legislation around GDP. And I wondered if that, have you been having conversations with the Information Commissioner around that? Because obviously that's all about minimizing use of data and also the accuracy of storage. Whereas what we're realizing when we're hearing about, for example, the 352 method, you're looking at data there that's unreliable, but is building a picture, if you were, of certain sources. So I just wondered about that. And also the second part was, when you share that data, you've mentioned there's increased risk when the data is shared, and I wondered how often you, as it were, scrutinize what happens to data that you share, and is it being looked after in the same way you would look after it?
Okay.
Want me to take these sort of as we go along then, Karen? Because
yes, I haven't got another hand up at the moment, Rob, so take that one.
Okay. I mean, look, this is a really, really complex area, isn't it? Covert, really sensitive stuff. But if I deal with the data bit first, just to give you some assurance, anything where we're operating in that sort of covert space, there is quite a lot of independent scrutiny about it. So when we're talking around data, often it relates to collateral intrusion. So people where we're doing covert ops and somebody's present, but they're not the subject of the operation, but there might be 2 or 3 other people in the room. And we gather data, not just on the subject that we're investigating, but the others. And there's really, really strict guidelines that we follow that are set out by the ICO, and they do audit it, they do regulate it. So there's quite a lot of protection that the ICO afford around collateral intrusion and sensitive data. So I think the framework has evolved over many, many years, hasn't it? As things have got wrong in the past and have been refined. So I'm certainly confident that our current arrangements are quite robust. We've been audited twice, and we've come out of those with really, really good performance. And the thing is, if you don't get that right, again, some assurance to the panel, if you don't get that right, it is serious fines get placed on the force. So it's not an area that you mess about with. You've got to get it right. So certainly in terms of that. In terms of sharing the data, I mean, my recollection when I read it, it was very much around the ethical decisions that officers have to make as to, you might receive some information, whether that be through direct human source or undercover information. You have to weigh up, if you were to act on that, would that cause a compromise to where the information come from? And on a daily basis, we're having discussions. I say we, often it's managed primarily by our intelligence unit, who are really, really quite skilled in it. and weighing up what's the threat and risk that is posed that the intelligence is about versus the compromise or the risk of compromise for the individual that has passed that information. And again, I don't want to over dramatize this, but often where it's really sensitive is where it's dealing with threats to life. You know, this is often in that murky world of organised criminality, enforcing debts, levels of violence, kidnap. It's often in that space. So, you know, they are ethical decisions.
Oh, Rob, you're freezing up a
but
bit.
certainly, oh, am I? Sorry. Yeah,
Yeah.
certainly. I think in terms of I think it's there for purposes just to demonstrate the ethical dilemmas that officers are going through on a day-by-day basis, making these choices. Invariably, Article 2, right to life, tends to be a primary driver. So if there's a threat to somebody's life, then we'll look at how we can triangulate the intelligence that we've been given and perhaps introduce it in a way that doesn't compromise where the information came from in the first place. And to date, we've not had anything which has caused us concerns. I mean, obviously, in the past, I can think of things where we've had to take some mitigating action, but generally, in the volume of threat that we're managing, we're doing a good job, I think.
Okay, thank you. And take Lois and then Mark.
Thanks. One of my concerns was some of the terminology used within the documentation. So in paragraph 6 and 7, it talks about drug addicts, and then in 12 about substance misusers. Drug addicts is a very outmoded and quite abusive term, so it would be better to have the whole document with substance misusers. And also is how you manage understanding the capacity of people to and their consent levels when you're working with people who are intoxicated. And whether they have that capacity to be able to take place, and whether some of that could be viewed as coercive in the way that
you broke up at the.
Sorry, just about how you assess their capacity to be able to consent to the information they're providing if they're intoxicated or they're perceived to be, because if they're perceived to be persistent drug use and involved with criminality, how do you assess that they have that capacity to give that information?
Yeah, okay, yeah. So firstly, the language one, I absolutely agree with that. To put it into context, this has been written by a detective superintendent who's probably working 60 hours a week, and he's been told, can you write a paper for the ethics committee? So I'm not going to defend it. I'll take that on the chin. I didn't pick that up as I skimmed through it, but absolutely, I totally agree. The language needs to be consistent, so apologies for that. In terms of the consent levels, if they're going to go on and become what's known as a registered informant, CHIS, it's referred to, covert human intelligence source, there's really quite strict risk assessments that go through it. And it's not just one person's decision, it's several people's decision. And there's what's known as an authorising officer, and invariably that authorising officer has to meet the person and satisfy themselves that this isn't going to cause a risk. Because if you start to have a professional relationship with somebody who's passing information, depending on their lifestyle, if it's far too chaotic, it's too much risk. So generally, it takes several people to come to that conclusion that it's a relationship that's worth fostering.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, actually, you've just really addressed the main point there, Rob. Thank you very much for that. And I was very reassured by this excellent report that there's a sort of a level-driven system in terms of how you make these decisions ethically. You talk about the fact that these are ethical dilemmas that most officers face on a day-to-day basis, that you're looking for corroborative intelligence to back that up, that you use a bespoke and individual assessment model to take that through. And yes, indeed, as you've just mentioned, that there's an authorising officer involved. It doesn't say in the paper that they meet the person directly. I think it would be a useful addition to put that in. So I was really reassured to see that that was being handled so sensitively. I'm just going to look at paragraph 7 and paragraph 11, both of which are on, I think, the second page of this document. Paragraph 7 makes the point that lots of people who are involved, who are your sources of information, are themselves quite vulnerable. And paragraph 11 makes the point that organised criminals are getting quite sophisticated now at putting people between themselves and the supply of drugs to sort of obfuscate their involvement, using, as I think you call them, runners or mules. And we know lots, don't we, from the County Lines and CCE research, that it's quite likely that they will indeed be vulnerable people and could indeed be vulnerable young people. So in addition to, there is a question here, I promise you, here it comes. In addition to making sure if there's a threat to life and limb, and to when they can be readily identified as the source of the information. I wonder to what extent, as a force, you, subsequent to somebody giving you information, took some responsibility perhaps to offer them additional support, bearing in mind we are talking perhaps about young people, bearing in mind they are vulnerable.
Yeah. I mean, this, Mark, it's a really good question, and again, that sort of ethical space of policing. We know, because I think we spoke about it at the last panel actually, around the rise in criminal exploitation. Well, the rise in criminal exploitation is largely around those sort of vulnerable and young people that are being brought into criminality. Often they'll be either given some gifts or asked to run some drugs. Often it can lead to them being robbed, and then they're over debt, and then they're being forced into criminal exploitation in that way. Quite advanced multi-agency working now, as we talked through last time, about how that works. When we're talking about this type of operation, generally it would follow the same form. So if we picked up on somebody that was involved in low-level criminality, our primary route would be how do we safeguard them? How do we safeguard them? Because ultimately the safeguarding of the child is our number one priority. There will then be, depending on the level of their vulnerability, I mean, some will be far too vulnerable and it's not at all an option. Clearly, if somebody is they're vulnerable by age, but they're quite street savvy. So I'm going to talk about, I can think of people who are 15, 16 that would run rings around all of us in terms of street, because they are extremely life experienced. There might then be a slightly alternate view, which would be not a 15-year-old, but let's say a 17-year-old or an 18-year-old. There might be a view that actually, in the broader interest of a sustained public protection approach, that actually working with that person for a month, 2 months, whilst also providing support, might then provide insight into the next tier up or the tier above that. Because if you just keep taking out those that are runners, the reality is the people that are doing the operations are just going out and targeting and grooming and recruiting other people. So it's a fine balancing act, but generally it will start with assessing the vulnerability of the individual, starting with a view of how you safeguard that person, and then it will start to then broaden out as to whether there's something that we would need to do. But there is a lot of documentation, a lot of risk assessments that would go around any of that decision making.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Stephen.
Yes. Whose phone's going? I just want to link what Rob's just said there exactly back to the paper on Stop and Search. And one of the justifications in paper on Stop and Search was in relation to searches under Section 23 of the Misuse of Drugs Act, was searches that focus increasingly upon supply rather than just new personal use. But again, if those searches are upon those vulnerable mules and runners, and all you're doing is taking those out, it's not really dealing with that problem unless it is part of the coordinated approach such as this, which is trying to be much more evidence-led as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes absolute sense, Stephen. I can confirm. It's very much the latter. It's a joined-up, coordinated response. Certainly, we've got a number of things going on locally. So we've obviously got the Violent Reduction Network, which is operating in this space. We've got the work that we did on the back of a fairly sizable operation up Lionheart, which I think I've briefed you on previously. And it was really that operation that pulled together children's services to look at that whole multi-agency approach to criminal exploitation.
Okay.
If I remember rightly, you've got Stevie J. Harding, who used to work at the University of Criminology, working with you on that sort of matters as well. If I remember right, she's just moved to do something along those lines.
Yeah.
Right, thank you. So again, quite a lot of issues there, Rob. GDPR terminology, consent levels, support for the informer and safeguarding. And there was also mention of national processes in the paper, which are there to protect the covert officer.
Yeah.
And I was wondering about whether there are similar processes written down about protecting the informer or the mule, if you like, and whether it was possible for us to see them. I'm not sure whether that's no. Okay, all right, that's fine.
I mean, it's one of the. I mean, it's really interesting because personally, I think this is really quite a positive conversation in the fact that but historically, this is so covert, our activity, that we've not had these sort of conversations. So I think it's getting that balance in terms of what gets scrutinised. Clearly, what you would get access to is when the HMIC and the ICO and others come in and do their audit. Clearly, that then becomes a document that might be worth socialising at a later point. But no, just to answer your question around the national processes. They are fairly well. They're extremely well defined for undercover operatives, but certainly when you're talking around the covert human intelligence sources, once that risk assessment has been taken on by the force,
You froze, Rob.
we have a duty of care. So
okay.
Are you still getting me?
Yeah, I think we got it. Maybe it was just me, but it was just once the risk assessment has been done, we have a duty of care. Is that right?
Yeah, effectively. So that risk assessment will inform what we're prepared to do. And clearly, if providing the person that we've entered into that relationship maintains the rules that we need to set with them, because let's be honest, some of these people don't like following rules. So providing that they follow the guidelines and the rules that we set, and if there is a compromise and we're liable, then there's a duty of care on us.
Right. Okay.
But clearly what we also do is if they're not complying, at the earliest indication that there's any risk, we walk away from that relationship. Right.
Okay. Thank you very much. I will move on, committee members, to paper C. Rob, did you have any words of introduction? I forgot about allowing that for the last paper, but do you want to introduce this at all?
No, I'm happy. I'm working on a basis. I know you read them very thoroughly, so I don't think you need me to tell you what the paper is. So
okay, that's fine. Then we shall just feedback some of the points we made. So let's see. Who would like to open up this discussion? We had several comments. Gail.
Hi, thanks, Joe. I mean, one of the comments I had really after reading the paper was, I wonder if it's about better comms, better communication with the residents in the rural communities, and maybe better engagement, so they actually understand the data and the fact that they are not, as they may perceived, to be at a higher risk. That was just a general point.
Okay, thanks. Rob, do you want to answer that one, or yeah, go on, go ahead.
I mean, Gail, it's one of those where I do agree, and we've got Chris on the line, and I know that Chris constantly is looking at ways to get the message out there around what activity is going on with rural crime. I get a sense there is a real thirst for information and a thirst for visibility, but of course what this paper does is it sets out that you've got a high level of expectation, but actually a fairly low level in terms of threat and need. And what we're trying to do is to find that optimum sweet blend, aren't we?
Yeah, thank you. I'll take Lynn and then Mark.
Yes, I was recalling one of our first meetings as the Ethics Committee, and there was a discussion about a rural community financing a policing post. And I just wondered if that was still happening.
No, sadly, I wish it was. No, it was one of the I remember that, and it was Uppingham, I think. Uppingham Parish Council were looking at whether they could use some of their funding to buy in their own designated village bobby, effectively. But when we did the maths on it, their funding fell quite short.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Okay. Well, thanks for this paper. I really have some empathy with the police as far as this is concerned, because I know that there are some very powerful voices across the county who will make their views very well known as to what they see as receiving the sort of short end of the stick as far as policing is concerned. And I know that sometimes puts the force in a difficult position. You ask us 3 specific questions in this paper at paragraph 4. The first one is, should the force invest greater resource in enhancing the confidence of rural areas? I can't speak for the committee as a whole, but I can give you my view, and I'm certainly not going to sit on the fence about it. And the answer to that question would be no. I think the force is well advised, as you've just inferred, Rob, to take a sort of a balanced but data-driven approach to how you deploy what are always going to be limited and scarce resources. And it just wouldn't make any sense at all to have an unbalanced approach that led to high policing, high profile policing in areas where there is very little evidence that is required. I think the point from Gail is a really good one. That needs to be communicated so that people understand it better, although it may be a message they don't want to hear. But going on to the second point, and I'll finish with this one, what weight should we place on whether communities feel that we're dealing with things in a matter that works for them locally? Again, one needs to be sensitive to keeping good relations between all communities and the police, but it wouldn't be my first interest as to what the local community feel about the presence and appropriateness of policing, if I could back that up by saying this is the approach that we take to deploying the resources, and this is the explanation as to why you get the resources that you do. So I don't have a great deal of sensitivity, I suppose is the word I'm looking for here, to deploying scarce resources to areas where there is a low incidence of crime, but a high fear of crime. There was a regrettable occurrence within the force some years ago when I think a senior officer was misquoted around the response that the force might take to burglary based on your address and the number of your house. That's clearly
I'm smiling. So I recall that well, Mark. I think that had come from a scientist, hadn't it? A scientist, a data-driven sort of experiment, but then it had been misquoted. But yeah, you're right.
So I think I've made my view reasonably clear. I think you do a good job at balancing what you've got, scarce resources. Don't worry too much about influential and potentially quite wealthy people giving you a hard time about it, so long as you've got the evidence to back it up.
Thank you, Mark.
Yes, can I comment? Or Callum's muted, so I'm going to take the opportunity to do so and lower my hand.
Sorry, go ahead, Stephen.
Yeah, I'd love to put this paper in front of my students when we do accountability and policing and principles of accountability, because I think this is a lovely example of how, when you're particularly thinking about that use of resource, there are a number of different factors which you have to balance. Yes, community consultation and what the community wants is important, but community isn't homogenous. There are different communities who want different things, and as part of the use of that resource, one of the things that you have to think that is important is equity and fairness. And equity and fairness doesn't mean that you give the same resource to everybody. You put the resources to help thrive, threat and harm, central to what you do. It's one of the first things that we were schooled in when we joined the committee, and that has to be the priority. So in that sense, I would very much agree with most of what Mark said. But add to that, and it's linked a little to what Gail was saying about the message. Of course, this is really a question as much as anything else. Going back to constabulary independence between operational decisions and strategy. This is strategy. And in order to defend your strategy, one of the important players there has to be the PCC. The PCC has to make part of this decision about where resources go. So the PCC should be defending these decisions as much as the Chief Constable has to defend these decisions as well. And I think that's important. One thing I will raise now, and it's only because it's my bugbear, and it's a comment, and I do want to come back to this next time we set our agenda. In both paper A and in paper C, it was made clear that roads policing and road safety is an issue that the community are concerned about. It's something that we have never talked about. You will know about the details, particularly in rural areas, the amount of death and serious injury on the roads. It's a real serious problem that resources need to be dedicated to. And I'd love us at some point to talk about that, but obviously not now. So that's just my little hobby horse, because I'm interested in roads policing.
Thank you, Stephen. Rob, did you want to come back, or should I? Chris, you've also got.
I was going to offer Stephen a day out with the roads policing unit.
Yes, please. Definitely.
Let's talk. You'd love it.
Yeah, when you've had a vaccination, Stephen, not yet.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So I've got Chris's hand up.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for the points earlier about comms. And it is a challenge for us to reach beyond where all of our officers can get to. But I think certainly in rural areas, in the last 6 to 9 months, we've been taking a different approach, to a more sophisticated approach, if I can put it that way, to show and not tell when we're out in communities and how we're doing it. And one of the ways that when we're extracting feedback from communities when they say what their priorities are, and that's done through a kind of survey system called Neighbourhood Link, we are playing back to them that you said this was a priority and this is where we've taken action. Yeah. And ideally, and predominantly through social media, trying to demonstrate them physically seeing that work being done. But we've also identified that for the rural communities, that not as much is being done as in the city. So the comms team have devoted more time to be out in those areas, capturing some of the work that's being done and using targeted, promoted social media on those local places first, and then replicating it across the. So something that I'm very much aware of. What we're doing now is trying to capture that rate of interaction so that we can see if we're getting more engagement from those communities on, for example, digital channels, and feed that into our decision making, which is the next step, which I suppose provides the data that Mark pointed to. You said this is the perception of the problem. This is how we've shown you how we're addressing the problem. Where do we go next with it?
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Gail, you had your hand up. Did you want to make a final comment?
I've just put it in the chat, Karen, because it was just a comment just about, I'd be quite interested maybe at a future meeting to look at something specifically around rural crime and get a better understanding about, because I think there is crime in the rural areas. I don't want it to appear as if, we don't think it happens, but I think it's very different to what happens in the city. I know there's a lot of, stuff around heritage crime and farming and that kind of thing. And we've already spoken about county lines. I'd be quite interested maybe in a future meeting to have a look at that in a bit more detail. Okay, fine. Thank you, Gail. I'll see what we can do, because I think when I did the forward plan with Angela, we had pretty packed agendas for the next few meetings. But yeah, it can be next year, Karen. It's fine. Okay, great. Thanks. Or we might be able to do just a written feedback or some reports or just some listing of what the main areas are. Maybe able to do that. Okay, thank you very much. Rob, did you want to comment on anything that you've heard?
No. Well, generally, again, thank you. It's got me thinking whether we need to do a rural crime sort of roadshow type, bring together everything in one place. But I'll pick it up with Chris, and it might be that we can pull some stuff together and then share that out for people. All right, thank you very much. It might aid a number of different audiences, but I'll pick it up with Chris outside. Perfect, thank you. So colleagues, can I move to paper D, please, which is the recording of rape offences. Rob, I'll invite you again, but if you want us just to comment, we can do, because we've had fairly good discussion around this. Well, a very good discussion. Yeah, no, I can imagine, but I'm happy, Karen, if you're good to go. Okay, we're good to go. So let me invite colleagues, anybody who would like to start off this conversation.
Mark?
You know, I've always got lots to say about things, Karen. This is a welcome paper. Firstly, thank you very much for it. In terms of the recording of rape offences, in our pre-meeting discussion with us as a committee, I asked Stephen if there was anything different about the way in which alleged rapes are recorded in comparison to how other types of alleged crime are recorded. And from his perspective, there wasn't. There's nothing particularly unique or special about the way in which alleged rape is recorded. Is that correct? So if I alleged a burglary or alleged a fraud or alleged some other type of offence, that would be recorded in exactly the same way that an alleged rape would be recorded.
Yeah, do you want me to answer that?
Yes.
Yeah. I guess in my mind, you're absolutely right, Mark. And this is all about national crime recording standards. And actually, this paper, I ought to do an intro for this one actually, because rape is a really, really important crime, and we've got a dedicated team that deal with rape. Signal, we are really, really keen to constantly improve around our rape investigation. We've got one of the national leading SARCs, which is obviously a multi-agency approach to how we deal with victims. I think what Matt Ditcher, who is the superintendent that's written this report, is trying to illustrate is being absolutely compliant with NCRS. There's no negotiation on that. We are going to be 100% compliant with NCRS. I think what he's illustrating is in becoming entirely NCRS compliant, what he's concerned about is that actually a member of the public could have their confidence levels could be or their fear of rape might be inflated over and above what the actual rape levels are. I think that's what he's trying to say, and what he's saying is how do we ensure that people understand the complexity of what a rape allegation, once if that word is used, it gets recorded. That's it. And the only way that can ever come off the system is if that person says, I made it up, or it's a false allegation. So invariably, whether it gets reported by that person or a third person, it goes on as a recorded rape. And I absolutely agree with that. The challenge then is that you can often find that in some allegations, we've got really robust investigation that then suggests that it hasn't happened and there's something else, and there's clearly more complex issues going on in that person's life, but it stays on the system. So I don't think what Matt is trying to say here is that there's any way that we would want to undermine correct classifications of rape. Let me just make that absolutely clear, and it's really important to us that we are 100% compliant around that. The challenge is actually it's really, really complex in terms of there is a percentage where there are evidence discrepancies against what is being alleged. The other issue, the challenge around rape, is that and we've got some work going on with external universities to try and understand this more. In 60% of cases, rapes that get reported to the police, the victim doesn't want an investigation. So if you think 2 out of 3 rapes, the victim, for whatever reason, doesn't want to make a statement, doesn't want to be interviewed, perhaps doesn't want to go through a forensic examination, probably maybe fearful of the criminal justice process. There may be that things have been said and it's got to a point where it's not quite where they want it to go. Whatever that reason is, we need to try and understand it more. And we've got some external work going on because we're really keen to understand that. Because ultimately, I sense there's a number of different reasons as to why people won't be wanting to progress a rape allegation.
Chair, can I pick that up? Just
you can. I knew you were going to, because I think your question was a precursor to what you really wanted to ask.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely hear what you're saying. If every force across the country is as fastidious as we know Leicestershire are in terms of reporting, then what will inevitably be a relatively small number and consequently a small percentage of allegations that are recorded but cannot be rescinded unless the person comes back to you and says, I made it up as you outlined, will be similar across all police forces. It's unlikely that that will be different in Leicester as compared to Lincolnshire or anywhere else in the Midlands for that matter. So I think if your question is about there are a small number of alleged rapes where the evidence points in a particular way, but we can't remove the allegation. If your point is that will somehow undermine public confidence, I think it will be consistent across the country, and I suspect it will be a very small number of cases. So it won't. I suspect no member of the public would say, well, it's obviously worse in Leicestershire than it is in another county. That's really interesting. But the second point, however, that you went on to make about 60% of victims not wanting what you introduced, and I agree with you, is a very difficult and important crime to be investigated. It's extraordinary, really. And again, I'm extrapolating from that. I don't think there's anything unique about Leicestershire. Is that true across the country from your perspective, Rob?
I would say, well, bearing in mind, I mean, I'm very conscious that this is a recorded conversation, and I know that we've got some external colleagues that have joined us. I can't speak for the rest of the country. I would anticipate, Mark, it's a fairly consistent picture. No, I wouldn't think we were an outlier in that. I would think that's a fairly consistent view. And of course, the challenge that then brings is when you start to look at conversion rates. So if I look at, we've got a really, really well-trained, highly skilled group of detectives that are constantly working on rape investigation, and they are extremely thorough and extremely good. But it is a real challenge when you've got, if you can't start an investigation with somebody who wants to support an investigation, and therefore it's really difficult to identify the scenes, to recover the forensic evidence. It becomes really difficult. It is like trying to investigate or push something uphill. The challenge that the team are trying to do is trying to understand that 60% more and make marginal gains across each ways to give more confidence. And this is not just a policing issue. This is a broader criminal justice issue. It's across the piece. And part of our approach to that has been really, really investing in our SARC, which is the multi-agency sexual referral centre, which effectively is staffed by some of the most hardworking and brilliantly engaging staff that you could ever find. So the idea is get it right at the beginning. You're more likely to get compliance, and you're more likely to then get an outcome at the end of the day.
Thank you, Stephen.
Yes, I want to come back on that, but before I do, I want to go to the sort of the general fuss and issue in the paper generally about this. Like Mark, I would question the extent to which this is a problem in terms of high numbers. But even if it was, the one thing that we know criminologically is that rape and sexual assault historically has been massively underreported. So, on paragraph 5 of the paper says this does not provide an accurate picture of the volume of offences to the public. The statistics on police recorded rape and sexual assaults have never provided an accurate picture because of the large extent of underreporting. We can't even take the details from the British Crime Survey of England and Wales as being accurate on this. Surveys that have been done which are much more sensitive and much more small scale than the British Crime Survey have shown the real horrific extent of rape and sexual assault across the country. And these difficult examples of what are clearly non-rapes, I think in terms of what it means to the figures, I think as a force you're just going to have to accept it. And I think one of the reasons you're going to have to accept it is the converse of that is understanding the rationale behind the national crime recording standards. So I'm sure you're well aware of, the problem historically was that when the police had more discretion in terms of when to record, different forces recorded allegations in different ways. Those national standards are there for a reason. And while they take away an awful lot of discretion, and we've discussed this in different contexts as well.
We have discussed this before, yeah.
While they take away an awful lot of discretion, the point of that overall means that the statistics are more robust than they've ever been historically. And there were going to be issues with that. I think it's not a problem. But the second point I make, which builds upon what you were saying in terms of talking to Mark, particularly around non-victim compliance, is you're well aware that's historically been a problem as well with domestic violence, as well as rape and sexual assault. Things like body-worn footage in relation to domestic violence have allowed you to do more non-victim driven prosecutions. I fully accept in relation to rape and sexual assault, that's much more difficult. Yeah. But you can still potentially engage in prosecutions for offences that are related to those allegations, but not the rape and sexual assault. I would imagine that's going to be hard, and it is.
We do.
Yeah. But those are possible. But I think for me, the fundamental point now is one of the big things with the introduction of police and crime commissioners was the largely abolition of most of your national targets that you were asked to make. And I would suggest as a force there that one of the things that you need to do is recognise that those numbers that you're producing are not necessarily representative of the work that you're doing, and just accept that. You aren't being measured by them in the way that you were historically. They aren't linked to how the government are holding you to account. You're now being held to account predominantly by your police and crime commissioner, and that's a relationship where you can say, as you've just done with us, we are doing all of these good things. We know that what we do right at the start of the process is really important. The figures don't reflect really what we're doing, but we can defend what it is that we're doing as best that we can. And yes, there are going to be some anomalies, but these are just numbers. What matters is that.
Rob.
Yeah, Stephen, I don't disagree, and I guess I'm sort of sat here thinking it's an interesting discussion in terms of the papers coming to the ethics committee and the purpose, because I think what we're doing is we've got a work programme going forward, and within that work programme, what we're trying to do is say, okay, so what are some of the ethical issues that officers are having to reconcile in their own mind on a day-by-day basis? So we just need to be clear. I'm not coming here to say that I think this is a wrong approach. I actually think I do agree with you. I think we need transparency, and I think nationally we are having to take that sense of actually just accept and be able to explain it. So it's the context by which we're sharing some of the ethical issues that these specialist units are being exposed to, not saying that I think they're wrong, if that makes sense. Does that help for the broader context? Because I worry that anybody listening to this and not been with us on the journey might think that actually I'm presenting this paper because I think we should not be recording rape in the way that we are, and that's definitely not my position. My position is if it's alleged, we record it, we do our best to investigate it. But I do think in the broader national discussions that are taking place around rape conversion, i.e. what then ends up going in a conviction, I think it's a really, really complicated landscape. And when you start to look at compliance, general fear, all the other bits, and often it's considered that it's the police is the primary bit for undermining that offence being brought to justice. And I think it's far more complicated than that. And I hope what you're trying to get from me is that I've got some really committed and professional people working with people outside of policing to constantly push that and look for those marginal gains.
I think it's been really helpful, Rob, that having you here just to give us a bit more, because I think what came over from the paper wasn't strong enough on what we're really getting to, because I mean, obviously we're really concerned about the confidence of people that have experienced rape to be able to report it and think that they might get a result that's halfway decent. And some of the examples in the paper I don't think were that helpful, because they really, 3 of them I think focused on mental health issues. So that wasn't entirely helpful, but it's great to have you here, and I think we entirely accept that what we're trying to do is look at ways that we can increase that confidence. Mark, sorry, you've got a hand up, so I'm going to bring you back in. Come off mute, Mark. Mark?
I do apologise. Yeah, it's just Rob has talked a couple of times about a specialist team of officers doing this very difficult work. And I don't want to talk on behalf of the committee, but I can really understand that that would be extraordinarily difficult work for any person to do. And in responding to this paper, I wouldn't wish in any way to undermine the work that's being done there. In fact, I think the officers who work in that area are doing a really outstanding job in a difficult circumstance. So I just wanted to reiterate back to you that I certainly understand, and I hope the other members of the committee also understand, officers will choose to work in this area. It's a particularly demanding area. And,
it is.
Consequently, it's really important that we don't in any way undermine that, and we also give thanks back to those officers for the extraordinary work that they do.
Thank you. I think that's a nice way to round up that discussion, actually.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. So I'm going to move on to sorry, just a minute. I'm moving on to Leicestershire Police Promotion Selection Process, paper E. It's a brilliant meeting, Rob, but we had so much to say on all of the papers. So sorry if we keep you really busy. And this one was no exception.
Isn't it, Karen? This is the one we're bringing back, isn't it? Didn't we have this before? Or am I imagining things?
Yeah, we wanted a bit more detail. Unfortunately, I think we've got more questions. So. But that's okay. It's good that we've got this iterative process, so we can get to a point where we are raising all the questions we need to be raising. Lots of comments, as I say. Who would like to open this up? Lynn, did you want? Oh, Gail. Okay, great. You've got a hand up. Go for it, Gail.
Hi. Thanks, Karen. So because I'm a new committee member, I haven't seen this before, and I have to say I struggled with some of the information and the data. So one of my points was, and I apologise if this has been here before, is to actually maybe have somebody present the paper and give it a bit more context for me. One of the questions that I had is, because there were so many acronyms that I didn't really understand, what I wanted to get to understand was what does it look like in terms of, the progression rates for officers and the retention rates for officers, and it did appear to me that there was an opportunity for some gatekeeping. So you have to have your line manager request that you can then put yourself forward for a promotion. And I just wondered, what were the kind of checks and balances to ensure that was a kind of equal and fair process, just because you may not get on with your line manager. So I needed to understand a little bit more about what I was reading, to be honest. But I think that's maybe my lack of knowledge and understanding.
I don't think it is, Gail. I mean, even though I've been here a little longer than you, there were many acronyms I just didn't understand, and reached the point where I didn't understand a lot of what was in the paper. So I don't think it is just you, and I would certainly welcome some of that. Rob, can I bring a couple of other people in?
Shall I summarise it?
Yeah.
I think if that helps, because again, this has been written by our HR colleagues, and they are using some language in there which is probably very relevant to their world. But I do totally accept that feedback. So in terms of, let's deal with the police officers first. So we've ran a series of promotion processes for sergeant to inspector. The line management support for that was removed, and everybody was enabled to go through, and there was a large scale moderation exercise that had our staff networks, our Unison and our Fed involved, and then they went through basically a moderation exercise, and they came up with the top numbers that were going to get promoted. In terms of underrepresented groups in that was really positive. So I think from the PC to sergeant, from a black and Asian minority ethnics, 2 out of 3 went through that process. There was only 3 in it, but 2 went straight through and became inspectors. And one is, I think the plan is there's some opportunities that are being presented to that person, so that was very positive. And the ratios for male-female split again were considered to be quite favourable. If I then go on, what else the paper goes on to describe, because I think we were doing that last time we talked about this. What we hadn't done at that point is we hadn't then done the chief inspector and superintendent processes. So of the process was designed into 3 stages. You put your evidence in a claims form. Claims form gets marked independently, blind marked, but independent. So that gets a score aligned to it. Separate to that, we then pull together for both chief inspector and superintendent rank a community panel from members from across the different communities of Leicester and Leicestershire. Quite a strong presence of Black and Asian minority ethnics on that community group. And we also had a member of the Black Police Association were part of the community panel. And a chief inspector, they were given 48 hours in advance to think of their approach to tackling the issue of knife crime. So they were given a scenario and they were going to come in and talk that through, and the panel were then able to interact with them, and they then got a mark. When we did the superintendents, it was to do with, you won't be surprised, the question was set and I set it, and it was all around diversity and inclusion. And it was around recruitment, progression, and general diversity. And the panel were then able to hear what their take on it was, where they were going to take it, how they would promote it, and then there was a Q&A session that the panel would do. Both the chief inspector and superintendent then went through to what is a formal competency-based, operationally based scenario, which I chaired both for the chief inspector and superintendents. They get a mark all the way across. Each stage is marked separately, and then it's aggregated up and we get a pass and fail. I guess the headlines from that would be there was one Black and Asian minority ethnic that was in the superintendent process. He's passed, and actually it was his paper that we were reading earlier around special operations and covert policing. And of the chief inspectors, there were it ended up with, I think, 19 went through to interview phase. So the panel and the interview, and of that there were 2 Black and Asian and minority ethnics, and both were successful at the panel. Both of them are getting promoted. So the superintendent is promoted in post. He was a temporary superintendent, and the 2 chief inspectors, one is Cam Mystery, who is currently East Park Road, so Spinney Hill Police Station. He'll go out as a chief inspector, and the other one is Manjit Atwell, who I think some of you may know, who was the former MPA commander for the city. She'll be going as a chief inspector also in the city. So both of those got through. Throughout we did do mentoring support in advance of the process, and we're just in the moment going through and getting feedback from those that went through the process, and the general feedback is they felt it was very fair, very transparent, and the right people got promoted. That's me doing a summary, Karen.
That's a great summary. Thanks, Rob. But we do have some other questions, which we will now put to you, I think. So let me first invite anybody else from the committee. Everybody's feeling a bit shy. One thing that I wanted to ask Rob, while other people are thinking, is under point 7 and 10, there is reference to positive action provisions under section 159 of the Equality Act.
Yeah.
And I wasn't clear about at what stage and how those processes were applied. So in point 7, the bullet point is like 5th on the list. In point 10, it's 1st. And I'm not sure whether that was a priority list or whether there's something else going on there. That would really be good for me to understand.
I don't think it's in priority, Karen, if that helps. I don't think it's listed in priority.
That was just one thing that I wanted to ask about. and to kind of understand a bit more about the figures, because I found, yeah, the numbers of Black, Asian or minority ethnic people were quite low still. So I'd like to have a bit more understanding of the proportion out of the total workforce
if I was to say at Superintendent and Chief Inspector, 100% of underrepresented groups passed. So
okay.
I can't promote people I haven't got, basically. So there is that bit of so there was 3 eligible from sergeant to inspector, and 2 out of 3 got promoted, and 1 will get a development opportunity. Of those that were eligible for chief inspector, 2 got promoted and 2 were in the process. Okay. And of superintendent. But what I can say, and this is really important to me, they passed on merit, and the process was really transparent. And so the positive action, what we've done for them, is they were given mentoring support before the process. So they've got the positive action support. Some of that's internal mentoring, some of it's external mentoring. So we had some external mentors made available. But once the process started, that positive action clearly stops, because that's at the point it should stop. The second bit is, did we apply balancing measures? And in terms of balancing measures, were applied in the inspector process, because there was a large cohort and balancing measures were applied. There was a lot that scored the same effectively, and balancing measures was applied. But in the chief inspectors and superintendent process, there wasn't any requirement to do balancing measures.
Right. Thank you, Rob. Thank you very much for that explanation. Mark.
Well, thanks very much for that. I think this is a really interesting paper, you're right. So it's not the first time we have had a look at it. I'm really reassured. I think this is a commendable process. I was very pleased to see the engagement with the community that you talked about as part of the process. And I think the positive action that you have taken as a force in terms of supporting and mentoring people is wholly proportionate, wholly acceptable, when taken with the caveat of what you've just gone on to say, that people were promoted on the basis of merit, which is of course what we expect. The question is this: we hear quite a lot from other professions, particularly nursing and GPs, also in social work to some extent, that there's a sort of looming retirement problem. As a group of senior people who've been around for a long time come to the end of their working lives, and there's a problem in terms of backfilling behind those people as they go. Now, police officers can retire at what seems a unique and obscenely young age. So I hope you've no plans in that area, particularly Rob, because we're not going to let you go. But is that a problem for Leicestershire? Have you got that in mind? And if you have, how are you managing that?
Mark, that is a really, really intuitive question, because actually, and I don't know if we've discussed it here, but we've recognised that we've got a 42% churn over the next sort of 3 to 4 years with retirements. And of course, you will know there's a lot going on nationally around tax and pensions and things like that, and I think people are very fearful of that. So we're expecting a worst case scenario of probably up to 40 to 42% of churn. So as a result of that, we've got a work stream of these skills and capabilities. So we're mapping all our skills and capability, but not just in a year by year for training purposes. We're looking at a 3 to 4 year trajectory. We're setting up we're reconfiguring our learning and development department into a Team Leicestershire Academy, and we're setting up faculties which are linked to local policing, to crime, to leadership, and within that, what we're also then starting to look at is succession planning like we've never looked at it before. So certainly when you think about underrepresented groups and where they are in terms of coming through the organisation, we've set up a programme which is dedicated to a number of those that are considered to be talented from underrepresented groups. They're going through that at the moment. It's the Positive Action Leadership Scheme, and that's going really well, actually. Some really good feedback about that. So we're anticipating that whilst they're going through that, and generally that's sort of a sergeant level at the moment, because that's where we've got more numbers, but the idea being that they will then be very eligible for some succession going forward. So quite a lot going on there. And I guess the other bit that I ought to share with you, since we last spoke about this, of course, on the back of the Black History Month, you may have picked up that both Lord Willie Back and Simon Cole made a public pledge, and within that public pledge, it was a 1 in 4 for recruitment, and all of the recruitment numbers at the moment, because we're going through a transition from our current way of recruiting to what will be the DET programme, which is the degree holder entry programme going into next year. And you'll also know that we changed the profile of our recruitment team. So we've got a lot of our recruitment team now are from Black, Asian, minority ethnic groups, which is really, really positive. And we've got our positive action.
Is it just me? Rob? Oh, okay, there you go.
Am I with you?
Is it just me, or is Rob cutting out for everybody?
He cut out for me the last few seconds.
Okay. Yeah.
That was when I was saying something brilliant, Gail.
I'm sure it was.
I think you were saying you're never going to retire, Rob. Was that right?
Well, yeah, the grey hair rapidly coming. So I guess where we are, to answer your question, Mark, we are really having a look at far more sophisticated than we've done in the past, and there's programs now that are going on with people that we anticipate are going to move through the organisation quite quickly. And interestingly, I know we're going to come on to Rich's bit in a minute, but what you might remember from when we spoke about this before is, well, what was the distribution of underrepresented groups across the force? And there was a concern around like PSD. Well, we've significantly changed the profile of our PSD, and actually the inspector going in the new year for complaints is from the Sikh community. So right. We are really, really making some good progress, I think, in some of these areas.
That's so good to hear, and well done for kind of taking that forward and, being really proactive about what's happening. So that's really good to hear. Thank you, Rob. So, I mean, I think, we just had, those are the main kind of questions around that paper. The acronyms, maybe we don't need to do it here, but there were lots in there that I just didn't understand. So it'd be really good just to know what they are, like Osprey or MPPF or you. What's it? There were a few.
I'll make a note that I'll try and act as a filter next time. How's that?
Thank you. It's just so we can understand the paper better, I think. Rather
no problem.
Any other comments on that paper from anybody else? No. Okay. So if it's okay, I'm going to move on because it is nearly 3:45. Onto the dip sampling paper, and welcome, Rich.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Thank you for the comments from the dip sample from the 3rd of November. There's only 3 items that comment has sort of been made. I think most of it is I think you've agreed with the action that we've taken. So if you're okay, I'll just sort of go through the 3 there where we need to make comments. So the first one is reference complaint 391 of 19, and it's actually relating to a stop and search matter. So male stopped and searched with others. We found some drugs. He's been arrested, taken into custody, but he's made a subsequent complaint, 5 allegations, 2 relating to the actual stop itself, and the other 3 relating to his time in custody. The comments around this one was his engagement, because I think he sort of started to make allegations around the professionalism of the officers. Unfortunately, he's not engaged with the process, and it's quite clear from what the investigator's done. There's been 7 separate occasions where he's been contacted via phone, and he just simply won't engage. There's been a couple of times where he's answered the phone, he's not available, won't make himself available. Other times he's just not answering his phone. So it makes it really, really tricky to try and actually get any real context around that. However, we will investigate anyway. So those 5 allegations were investigated. We've looked at body-worn video, we've looked at custody records, as we sort of alluded to earlier. We will investigate, we will look for other evidence. So sort of happy it's been investigated. Out of the 5 allegations, there's only one where we suggested that the service was not acceptable, and this was about the initial stop and search, where I think it was a cold day. I think his jacket was taken off him in order to facilitate the search. I think he complained that it wasn't given back to him for an unreasonable amount of time, and he was cold. So we've said that service was not acceptable. Feedback was given to the officer, and we've moved on. So despite the the individual not cooperating, not engaging with us. We've investigated anyway to the point where actually we fully understand what happened, and actually we're happy with the service that he received, bar that one allegation. So that was kind of the summary for that particular one. So I'll pause there for any sort of questions or any comments on that one.
Go ahead, Rich.
Okay, yeah, next one. This is a COVID-related complaint. So this is reference 482 of 19. So this is a member of the public who's been shopping. They've seen a couple of PCSOs walking out in front of them, and there's a group of people in the car park or nearby that are clearly not socially distanced, and as part of the regulations, as part of the government guidance. And the PCSOs have been heard to say, oh, I'm not going to confront those individuals. I don't want a confrontation. And they've essentially not dealt with the individuals. So the member of the public quite rightly complained, said they should have been engaged. They should have at least tried to disperse them. There should have been some action taken. So in terms of the comments, it was just around what our PCSOs expect to deal with, around some of the confrontation, what training are they given. So I can confirm that PCSOs do receive training in relation to conflict management and conflict resolution, and they are issued with appropriate personal protective equipment. It doesn't include handcuffs or cap spray or batons, but actually they are equipped to deal with these situations. So and in respect of the sort of the COVID lockdown, all officers and PCSOs and staff had the same briefing in terms of how to approach this, what the legislation was saying, and the 4 E's, which was to engage, explain, encourage, and obviously the final one was to enforce. So we've apologised for this. The service was not acceptable. The PCSOs should have engaged. They should have at least started with engagement, speaking to them. They should have explained what the regulations are, and they should have encouraged them to split up and leave. If it got to the enforcement stage and there was any concern around their safety, then they had the option to call the control room and ask for support from police officers. So that incident was more than, well, they were more than capable of actually dealing with that. They chose not to, and that feedback has been given straight back to those PCSOs, and we've apologised to the member of the public. So that was the kind of summary of that one. So again, I'll sort of pause at that point for any sort of comments or anything else anyone wishes to mention. No, okay. We'll move on to the final one. This was a complaint reference 267 of 19. This was a stop check of a moped, which was seized under section 59 of the Police Reform Act 2002. This is where a vehicle's been used antisocially, committing driving offences. So this male previously been stopped. There was a marker on that vehicle that he'd been stopped and warned before about his behaviour. Again, his behaviour is witnessed by police officers. Had to take direct action to avoid a collision with the moped. They've stopped him, have engaged with him. It's all captured on body-worn video, which again we sort of talked about earlier. Absolutely fantastic. Officers are really professional, and they've issued a section 59 notice and recovered the moped. There was a subsequent complaint came of that allegation. Well, it's actually 3 allegations. 2 were withdrawn because of some issues around the veracity of what the complainant was saying. An allegation was not upheld. The officers were perfectly entitled. They had the authority to remove the vehicle. The issue being with this one is how that section 59 notice was filled out, and the comments around this are, you would like some confidence that that process is looked at, because I think there were some concerns about how it was documented, the location where the stop took place. So I can offer some reassurance that that whole process is going to be moved to an electronic version, which goes on to it's called the Pronto system, which is middleware that officers have. It's a small device which they can use to input data, do checks, which is electronic. It's a lot easier for them. So that whole section 59 process is going to move on to Pronto, which should deal with all the issues around accuracy and how information is actually presented onto that form, to make sure there are no issues about can it be read, is it accurate, are we in the right place, and that sort of offering that transparency around that whole process. And that is also being governed through the Get It Right First Time meeting in force, which deals and governs with all the force learning that sort of comes from matters such as this. So yeah, I can offer the reassurance that issue has been picked up, and there is a solution that hopefully will come online in the next few weeks. So that kind of summarises that third and final sort of matter from the dip sampling.
Thank you, Rich. As usual, thank you for paying so much attention to what's being said and giving us giving us full and thorough answers to the questions being raised. And thank you to colleagues for doing the dip sampling. I unfortunately couldn't get to the last one. Any other comments from members of the committee about the dip sampling? No. Okay. So I think that's all that's left now, is for me to say to you all, thank you very much for all of your hard work in the last year, and especially to the force for everything that you've done. And we've dealt with 2020. We can deal with anything in 2021. So please, Merry Christmas to everybody, Happy New Year, and stay safe, everybody, but enjoy whatever you can. So Stephen, you wanna say something?
Yeah, just have I missed something? You might have said it, but we've got item 11 on the agenda.
I have missed it. You know why I missed it though? Because of that body worn video. Anyway, okay, go for it. I'm so sorry, Stephen. You're absolutely right. Rob, was there any, before I was so keen to wish you all goodbye, was there anything you wanted to say on the COVID-19 update?
I think, I mean, I'll probably restrict the COVID to the policing, because obviously, as you know, when it was first declared as a major incident, we ran the SCG back end of, so we had it from March right the way through till the Leicester lockdown, and then the end of July, where we then handed it to health, who have got that continuing to go through. In terms of COVID internally, I would say we're continuing to run our goal groups. And at the moment, our business continuity plans seem to be standing up. We've had a couple of little outbreaks, primarily around the contact centre, where, and when I say outbreaks, they're more notifications now through the track and trace, and of course, very quickly you can lose quite a lot of people. But certainly nothing which has impacted on our operational ability. So I'm confident that the measures that we put in place, the health and safety walkthroughs, our COVID compliant sort of working practice seems to be standing up to rigour. Our frontline staff are continuing to do an amazing job, if I'm honest, because obviously it does feel that not only have we returned to normal demand, we've got more demand than we normally see, and then we've got the COVID demand on top, but we're continuing to forge through that. There's clearly been some benefits. We are working differently, using technology, but I think most of that you would have picked up throughout the year. I guess going forward, going into Christmas, New Year could be quite an interesting one for us, and what that brings. But you'll be seeing that playing out on the national media. There's certainly plans that we've put in place around Christmas and New Year. I'm really keen that we don't become the Christmas police, policing people that are having turkey dinners. But I'm sure we'll get some calls, but hopefully not too many. But the big issue will be around New Year's Eve, and what happens, and any illegal parties. And I get a sense that the message for us going out publicly is please enjoy your Christmas, but we're still in COVID, and please respect the principles of that. But then going into the new year, I think our tone will change, and it might become a little bit more enforcement led. So people organising large parties on New Year's Eve in a tier 3 might find themselves subject to some enforcement. But we're trying to get that balance, and I think we've done a good job in taking the public with us, maintaining public trust, getting the message out there, but also balancing that with some enforcement where it's necessary.
Thank you, Rob. Anybody want to ask any questions about Rob's verbal report there? Well, good luck with it. I hope you do get a bit of a break yourself, Rob. And thank you to the OPCC staff as well for the support during the year. So anybody have any other comments? Do you all remember what I said before? Because I'm not going to repeat it, but yeah, anything else at all? Okay, well, lots of love, speak to you all soon, and thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Karen. Thank you, bye-bye. Merry Christmas.
Merry
Bye-bye.
Christmas, bye-bye.